With his tweets, Musk set the stage for a powerful struggle with Cook, who holds immense influence over other tech companies through Apple's dominance. Musk has a vested interest now in Apple's cloud because of his ownership of Twitter, which he bought last month for $44 billion. Twitter is distributed through Apple's App Store and is used by iPhone and iPad owners around the world. In one tweet, Musk implied he was ready for war with Apple. Musk has been poised to confront Apple since taking over Twitter. His business plan is predicated on shifting its revenue from a dependence on advertising to a greater reliance on subscription sales. But any new subscription revenue will be subject to Apple's practice of taking as much as a 30% cut. Musk's complaints also come at a pivotal time for Apple. There's a push in Congress during the final months of the year to advance a series of antitrust laws. Among the bills under consideration is the Open App Markets Act, which seeks to give developers more control over their apps and allow them to skirt the fees that Apple and Google charge. Gene Munster, the managing partner of Loop Ventures, a technology research firm, says Elon is the latest chapter in a push to make App Store fees lower. This will resurrect a topic that's been fairly quiet over the past 6 months. Musk has actually threatened that maybe he will release a Twitter phone, essentially, and he'll build his own phone company if it is not possible for Apple to force Apple to open up the App Store. Apple has increasingly faced a backlash from app developers, as well as pressure from regulators and politicians around the world over its App Store policies. The App Store has become a prime gateway where billions of iPhone users download Twitter, Facebook, Snapchat, games, all sorts of other programs, making it an arbiter of software distribution. Apple then uses those fees to pay a staff of several hundred people who review each app that it distributes. The company has said its app reviewers protect customer privacy and security, as well as preventing them from being subjected to fraud. So all of this is, yes, market-driven, and yes, Musk would prefer to pay less money to Apple for subscriptions that are bought to Twitter from Apple. But there are serious questions about how Apple does its business, globally speaking. And the only way to solve that is not to, quote-unquote, punish Apple for doing business in China. The way to solve that is for the entire West to unify in opposition to China's policy, to encourage reshoring of businesses away from China, including Apple. And again, there are companies that have refused to do business in China specifically because of this. I mean, all credit to Mark Zuckerberg, a phrase that I don't say very often, over at Facebook. I mean, Zuckerberg has said he is not going to follow the Chinese protocols with regard to free speech, which is why Facebook is not available in China. So, the sort of battle over free speech, which right now is happening in the private sphere, is likely to extend into the public sphere as well as Chinese policy is implicated. Meanwhile, I got to say, this is amazing. So Karine Jean-Pierre was asked yesterday about Twitter and about quote-unquote misinformation appearing on Twitter. And she had much harsher words to say here about Elon Musk and Twitter than the administration has to say about the Chinese government that is currently locking people up and or maybe killing them if they protest the regime. Here she was saying, we're going to be looking into Twitter, not TikTok, a Chinese government propaganda outlet. We'll be looking into Twitter.
Are you concerned about Elon Musk says there's more and more subscribers coming online. Are you concerned about that? And what tools do you have? Who is it at the White House that is really keeping track of this?
So look, this is something that we're certainly keeping an eye on. And we have always been very clear and that when it comes to social media platforms, it is their responsibility to make sure that when it comes to misinformation, when it comes to the hate that we're seeing, that they take action, that they continue to take action.
I mean, amazing stuff from the White House. So the White House very upset with Elon Musk and the ability for people to use that app to distribute information they don't like. Not so interested in China cracking down on its own citizenry. After all, those protesters are speaking for themselves. Alrighty, meanwhile, the Washington Post editorial board is also on the Democratic bandwagon here. They say that Elon Musk is harming free speech. And the lack of focus here is astonishing, guys. It seems to me that a major media company like the Washington Post, owned by another billionaire, right, Jeff Bezos, who owns Amazon, that perhaps they should focus their ire not on the billionaire-owned free speech outlet Twitter, which is loosening its restrictions on speech. Maybe if you actually cared about speech, because you're a media outlet, you should focus in on, countries that are actively suppressing speech elsewhere. Maybe that's the stuff that you should focus in on. Or your political hacks who just don't like the distribution of information that you don't control at places like Twitter. But the Washington Post editorial board today has a piece called Elon Musk is harming free expression on Twitter, not protecting it. So far, they say Mr. Musk has governed Twitter according to his whims. This is always the weirdest accusation. I mean, yes, he is the private owner of a private company. He just spent $44 billion, which is a wild overpayment, to buy Twitter. So yes, and also, let's just get this straight. He actually is taking all the flack for all the decisions that Twitter is making as opposed to Jeff Bezos, who hands it off to his lackeys and then he disconnects himself from the business. And Musk is not saying the algorithm is responsible for this stuff. He's saying, I'm responsible for this stuff. And they're like, how dare you act according to your whim? So if you actually say the buck stops with me, you're acting according to your whim. If you delegate it out to a bunch of purple-haired DEI employees, and then you say that it's not your responsibility, that is what we call accountability, according to the Washington Post. The chief executive's polls supposedly express the will of the users, but many of those who engage regularly with his account are his diehard supporters, aware of his preferences, eager to see them enacted. Wait, you mean that Musk actually interacts with people who support him as opposed to people who yell at him like the Washington Post? Shocker, I can't believe it. This was true in the case of Mr. Trump, who so far has chosen not to return to using Twitter despite his account's reinstatement. And it was true in the case of Mr. Musk's most recent inquiry. Should Twitter offer a general amnesty to suspended accounts provided they have not broken the law or engaged in egregious spam? 72% said yes to the question, prompting Musk to announce the amnesty will begin this week. But determining whether an account has broken the law, when the law varies by location and legal judgments often require an expert eye, will be a logistical nightmare. Twitter just gutted its staff in broad-scale layoffs. If the company reintroduces en masse a group of users previously found to have violated its terms of services, what happens if they flout the rules again? Are there any rules now? Perhaps Mr. Musk doesn't believe that people engaging in hate and harassment should be barred from the site. Fine, but if that's the case, he should have revised the site's policies, allowed accounts suspended under the old regime to appeal under the new one, and applied the revised terms of service going forward. I mean, isn't that effectively what he's doing? I'm confused. And even if that's not what he's doing, if there are no revised terms of service, if he just says, listen, I'm running this the way I want it to run it, and so Alex Jones doesn't get back on, but Milo does, well, then we can blame him for that, and we can call him to account for that, which is more than I can say for the editorial board of the Washington Post. The approach Mr. Musk has chosen instead undermines the values he claims to cherish, says the Washington Post. Slashing the number of staff devoted to policing content can end up harming civil liberties. The Post reports Twitter is drowning in nuisance posts, mostly pornography, spewed onto the platform by accounts connected to the Chinese Communist Party in an effort to obscure news of recent protests. Now, again, I love that they are focusing in on Twitter's lack of safety features that prevent the spamming of the accounts on behalf of China, right? We talked about this yesterday. China has been basically using a bunch of Twitter bots in order to flood the zone with pornography, and then they will attach a hashtag in particular locations where they know there are protests in order to swamp and tsunami the actual news. And yes, that's really bad, and I wish that Twitter would stop all of that. Also, where's the editorial from the Washington Post calling for Apple to stop doing business in China? Where is the editorial from the Washington Post asking Apple to stop doing the bidding of the Chinese government with regard to its own communication services? Where exactly is the editorial from the Washington Post calling on TikTok to be banned in the United States? Like, where is it? It seems to me that you just don't like Elon Musk, and so you're looking for an excuse to rip on Musk when really that's not what you're upset about. But the Washington Post editorial board says spotty rule enforcement will make Twitter's decision-making more arbitrary and therefore less conducive to free expression. First of all, you're assuming it wasn't arbitrary in the first place. It was arbitrary. When people like Jordan Peterson were banned and Ayatollah Khamenei were not, that's pretty arbitrary, guys, I noticed. The most credible criticism of Mr. Trump's removal after the January 6th, 2021 insurrection was that it was capricious, seeming to spring not from violation of any specific policy, but rather from a seat-of-the-pants reaction to offline developments. As things stand now, it's unclear what one can and cannot say on Twitter or what Mr. Musk's next poll might result in. Again, I love it. They admit openly in this editorial from the Washington Post editorial board that it was arbitrary and capricious to ban Trump. And then they're like, but it's also arbitrary and capricious to unban Trump. So it seems to me that you like arbitrary and capricious, but only in one direction. And that seems like what I'm noticing here. Meanwhile, Musk announced yesterday that he would be releasing the Twitter Kraken. We will see what this amounts to. He tweeted out, the Twitter files on free speech suppression soon to be published on Twitter itself. The public deserves to know what really happened. We can only wait with bated breath this development. I'm very much looking forward to seeing what exactly happens and what was happening behind the scenes when Twitter made its decisions. I can tell you this, whatever suppression filters were on particular Twitter accounts, it definitely was on my account because since Elon Musk took over, I've gained 800,000 followers. That was like a month ago. I went from like 4.3 million followers on Twitter to 5.1 million followers on Twitter inside of a month, which shows you the level of suppression that was happening on Twitter before Musk came in. So it'll be fascinating to see what exactly was being suppressed under the regime that the left wing really does like. Alrighty, guys, the rest of the show is continuing right now. You're not going to want to miss it. We'll be getting into a Biden administration employee most famous for puppy play, getting caught stealing women's luggage, and plenty more. If you're not a member, click the link in the description and join us.